Hi, it's Katrina! From catching the bubonic plague to a secret ballroom in a station, here are 9 surprising facts about famous landmarks. Number 9. Destruction of the Marcos Monument. During fall 2018, social media posts featuring an image of a huge sculpture depicting former Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos went viral. They were shared tens of thousands of times and falsely claimed that the administration of Benigno Aquino III, who served as president of the Philippines from 2010 to 2016, destroyed the mountainside monument. In reality, the concrete bust was heavily damaged with dynamite in a December 2002 explosion, 8 years before Benigno assumed power and after several decades of neglect. The New People's Army, or NPA, an armed faction of communist guerrillas, proudly took responsibility for the blast, with alleged leader Martin Montana referring to the sculpture as an abomination that had to be eliminated and a symbol of Marcos' arrogance and egotism. But the NPA's claims are questionable, as it also appears that treasure hunters may have caused the blast, mistakenly believing that the bust contained secret treasure inside. Whatever the case, the incident ripped the statue's eyes, nose, and ears off. Many Facebook users unquestioningly hopped on the bandwagon of blaming Benigno's administration for the destruction of the Marcos Monument, further adding to the confusion. One thing remains certain, however: Benigno did not destroy the statue because the timing simply doesn't add up. The monument was built along a highway in the northern Philippines during the early 1980s when Marcos ruled under martial law. Marcos was overthrown in 1986, and the structure fell into disrepair over the following years, with the 2002 explosion ultimately sealing its fate. Number 8. Turning off Niagara Falls. Did you know that Niagara Falls could be controlled? You may be surprised to learn that Niagara Falls only flows at partial capacity, with between 50 and 75% of the Niagara River being diverted to nearby hydroelectric plants. Even more shockingly, in 2016, Wired announced New York State's authorities' plans to temporarily turn off Niagara Falls completely sometime during the next 5 to 7 years. On the surface, it seems like a tremendously difficult task, considering the combined American and Canadian sides of Niagara Falls boast the world's highest flow rate of all waterfalls. But the process of drying up the falls, called dewatering, is not nearly as expensive or difficult as you might think. In fact, it's been done before. For 5 months back in 1969, engineers and researchers dammed the Niagara River to study the bedrock's erosion. While tourists usually flock to the falls to see them in all their splendor, the absence of water, a supposedly once-in-a-lifetime event, drew an influx of visitors. The upcoming dewatering of Niagara Falls, a process authorities didn't plan to repeat after 1969, is now happening so that staff from the state's Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation can dismantle 2 bridges crossing the Niagara River that are no longer usable. At nearly 120 years old, the bridges, once used for trolleys, cars, and pedestrians, were deemed irreparable in 2005 and closed to the public. Exactly when and for how long the falls will be turned off is unknown, and New York State is currently deciding what types of structures to replace the bridges with. Number 7. The Golden Gate Bridge's accidental color. Famous for being the most photographed bridge in the world, the Golden Gate Bridge bears a burnt orange hue that may seem distinctive, yet largely inconsequential today, but was a big deal back in the 1930s. Architect Irving Morrow came up with the unusual hue called international orange after the steel structure was slathered in a coat of reddish-orange lead primer. At the time, most bridges were bland shades of gray, silver, and black, making Morrow's decision to champion the bold orange color a surprising one. The architect was tasked with convincing the permitting agency, the Department of War, that the vivid hue was appropriate for the world's longest suspension bridge. He presented the board with a 29-page document in favor of international orange, stating what has thus been played up in form should not be let down in color. Morrow won his case, and today the same exact color paint is used for painting the Golden Gate Bridge, a continuous task demanding between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of paint annually. Bridge fanatics often seek to apply the color to their home fixtures, like fences and dog houses, as well as other items like their bicycles. Paint Superintendent Rocky De La Roca told NPR, but their chances of getting their hands on true international orange are slim to none. While off-brand paints and other substances carrying the same name can be found for sale, none truly match the hue of the secret mixture used for the bridge. And now for number 6, but first be sure to subscribe and let us know which landmark you visited in the comments below. Number 6. Bubonic plague at the Grand Canyon. Caused by the bacteria Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague is a zoonotic illness, meaning it transmitted from an animal to its first human host before spreading like wildfire throughout the world several times throughout history. When you hear the term bubonic plague, you probably think of a medieval disease that infamously ravaged Europe and Asia in the 14th century in what became known as the Black Death. At the very least, you probably don't consider this seemingly archaic pathogen to be of concern now. I mean, COVID is enough anyway, right? We shouldn't be worried about the plague. For the most part, you don't have to, but the bubonic plague still appears every now and then, showing up in certain parts of the world more than others. While the disease is now curable, posing far less of a threat today than it did back in the Middle Ages, it's still not something you want to encounter if you can help it. One place with a known heightened risk of bubonic plague is Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. While the state only sees 1 to 2 cases of the disease on average every year, the chances of catching it in the Grand Canyon are much higher than anywhere else. Much like during the Black Death, the bubonic plague still spreads primarily from animals to humans, either through direct contact or bites from rodent fleas. While Grand Canyon visitors are unlikely to contract the plague, park staff still stresses the importance of being cautious, especially during the summer when the risk of catching the disease heightens. Visitors are warned to avoid contact with any wild animals, to not allow their pets to run loose, to use insect repellent, and take other common sense precautions. Number 5. Family history on file. The Salt Lake Temple is a temple belonging to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church. Dedicated in 1893, it's the church's 6th completed temple, and it's also the largest LDS temple by floor area, occupying 253,015 square feet. The neo-Gothic structure sits at the center of Temple Square, a 10-acre piece of property in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. While the temple itself is not open to the public, as its parishioners consider it sacred, visitors can tour several surrounding buildings within its namesake square, including the Family History Library, the world's largest genealogy center. Here, you can access over 3 billion ancestral records from around the world. Founded in 1894, the library offers specialized services from research specialists and trained volunteers, helping many visitors gain a more in-depth look at their past than ever before. The best part? The experience doesn't cost a penny. Admission to the Family History Library is free, and the library provides the previously mentioned services, as well as other memorable experiences and resources completely free of charge. Number 4. A freestanding monument. At over 555 feet tall, the Washington Monument was the world's tallest man-made structure upon its completion in 1884. The Eiffel Tower superseded this record just 5 years later in 1889, but the Washington Monument holds the distinction of being the world's tallest unreinforced or freestanding stone structure. Widely considered an engineering marvel, the 100,000-ton obelisk is made from 3 different types of stone blocks, which are held in place without mortar or structural support, relying on gravity and friction alone to stay in place. Construction began in 1848, but funding quickly ran dry, grinding the project to a halt in 1854. The monument's architect, Robert Mills, passed away the following year, making matters even worse, even causing Congress to withdraw a promised $200,000 toward the structure's completion. Finishing the Washington Monument was no simple task, requiring assistance from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during its final stages of construction. The original plan for the structure was much more ornate than the final product, which took on a barer, more stripped-down appearance as part of the builder's cost-cutting efforts. Number 3. Scenery once submerged. Canada's Badlands, not to be confused with the U.S. National Park in South Dakota, encompass a series of dramatic landforms in southern Alberta characterized by steep, barren slopes made from soft, eroded rock, twisting and bending in bizarre shapes, and with colors ranging from sandy hues to black. At first glance, the eerie, semi-arid landscape of Alberta's Badlands seems largely lifeless. Just a handful of species frequent the region's vast farmlands and sweeping plains, including common nighthawks, mule deer, coyotes, rabbits, porcupines, rattlesnakes, bats, and squirrels. In contrast to the stark surroundings of today's Badlands, the region was once chock full of diversity. During the late Cretaceous period, right around when the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, at least 35 dinosaur species called the Badlands home, as evidenced by the many fossil discoveries throughout the area. The region was also once submerged by the Western Interior Seaway, an ancient water body that essentially split North America in two, and which obviously no longer exists, with wetlands running along its shoreline. Researcher Alfio Alessandro Chiarenza told The Guardian that the Western Interior Seaway was a warm and shallow sea that changed its depth and how far it covered the land several times. In his words, lush tropical forests covered the lowlands, incised by creeks and streams running from the very young Rocky Mountains and filled with fresh water gathered from seasonal storms. In addition to hosting abundant dinosaur populations tens of millions of years ago, the Badlands were filled with species that are no longer present, including crocodiles, turtles, rays, salamanders, and fish-eating reptiles. Number 2. Britain's smallest police station. Situated at the southeast corner of Trafalgar Square in London is an inconspicuous space built into a lamppost, serving as Britain's smallest police station. Large enough to fit no more than 2 occupants, the station was built in 1926 so that the Metropolitan Police could keep an eye on demonstrators at the popular protest site. The decision to install a miniature police station into an ornamental light fixture came after World War I, when plans to renovate a temporary police box near Trafalgar Square met widespread opposition from the general public. Authorities found compromise in the less offensive and more hidden nature of the lamppost, which they gutted before installing 2 narrow windows and a direct phone line to Scotland Yard. If the officer inside the box needed help, all he had to do was lift the phone's receiver, which would cause the light on top of the structure to flash, alerting colleagues to his distress. While sources are conflicted regarding when the station went into service, it was most certainly being used by the 1930s. Today, the police no longer use the tiny station, but it hasn't lost its utilitarian value. Instead, it functions as a broom closet for Westminster council cleaners. Number 1. Secret Ballroom. As Australia's busiest railway hub, the iconic Flinders Street station serves nearly 100,000 travelers daily, but very few have ever stepped foot into the station's abandoned third-floor ballroom, which started out in the early 20th century as a lecture hall for the Victorian Railways Institute, an organization dedicated to the betterment of railway staff. The third floor also contains several other spaces, including an abandoned gymnasium, which granted private access to members of the institute, classrooms, a billiard room, and a library. During the 1950s and 60s, public dances were often held in the ballroom, pushing its 400-person capacity to the limit and marking its heyday. The dances always ended in time for attendees to make the last train home. On September 10, 1983, the station's last ever dance was held. Afterward, the ballroom was closed off to ordinary citizens and no longer used for special events. Since opening in 1910, the historic station has been slated for demolition several times, with the first known instance happening in the 1960s, when it was nearly replaced by buildings for a household gas provider. There have also been numerous plans to renovate the station, which never came to fruition for various reasons. Meanwhile, the ballroom, which was officially taken out of use in 1985 after being deemed unsuitable for tenants, continued to decay. The derelict ballroom's future remains uncertain, especially since it's been mostly excluded from plans for a $100 million overhaul of Flinders Street Station. As part of the restoration efforts, work was done to repair and waterproof the ballroom's leaking roof, and metal beams were erected to stabilize the structure. But the question of usability remains, despite countless ideas pouring in from members of the public, including the possibility of using the ballroom as a homeless shelter or a waypoint or a crisis center for socially isolated people and those who struggle with mental health issues. For now, however, the ballroom remains abandoned. Thanks for watching! Which monument is your favorite? What other types of destinations would you like to learn about? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!